Okay, there we go. So, marvels of modern technology. Everyone can hear okay? I'm the first one to go, so let's make sure everything's working great. I just want to talk about what Joe mentioned about Shenzhen, China. I have the interesting experience. I've been visiting Shenzhen for more than 20 years. And so I got to see firsthand just what an amazing transformation it made. I saw it with my own eyes over the last 20 years. It's just become this amazing world-class economic hub where just everything's being produced there. So it's really incredible. So, and it's my first time to use this software. So let's give it a try here. So hopefully everyone can now see my screen, I hope and think. And we have a nice little presentation here. Can someone confirm that my screen is being shared properly though? And I'll just trust you that it is. So anyhow, here we go. So for those that don't know, I was the first person in the entire world to start investing in this cryptocurrency ecosystem. I've been involved almost 10 years full time now, but this fits in perfectly with startup societies and free, economic zones and all this sort of stuff. So I hardly had to change my presentation at all from what I gave just a couple of days ago for this, because it's just a perfect match. And so the first slide here we have is, let's talk about economic freedom, right? Like that's what these, free trade zones and special economic zones are about. It's not about limiting the amount of economic freedom in those zones. It's about increasing the amount of economic freedom in those zones. And as we've seen from places like, Shenzhen and many others around the world, it leads to great benefits. But let's talk about what is economic freedom, right? Well, it's a measure of how easy it is for members of a society to participate in the economy, and it has a bunch of factors such as how easy it is to start a business, whether your property rights are enforced, free trade with people in other nations, regulation of the labor and businesses, and stability of the currency as well. So that's something that's near and dear to my heart as well. And we can see very, very clearly here, we have a list of countries around the world ranked by the amount of economic freedom in those countries. And you can see the countries with the most economic freedom are countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, Australia, Ireland, and on and on. And the countries with the least amount of economic freedom around the world are places like North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, the Congo. And if you look at those two lists there, it's very, very clear which one sets a better example for the world and which one are the types of places where people would rather live. Just about anybody would prefer to live in Hong Kong or Singapore or New Zealand than to live in North Korea, Venezuela, or Cuba. And so, we see some examples of this where people literally risk death to escape North Korea, Venezuela, and Cuba, and they build rafts out of garbage trying to escape the lack of economic freedom there. Whereas I've never, ever heard of anybody, trying to build a raft out of garbage to escape Hong Kong, Singapore, or New Zealand. It just plain doesn't happen. So very, very clear list here when you can see the countries with more economic freedom versus the countries with less economic freedom. And here, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. And as we just heard there, Hong Kong or Shenzhen as well, in just a few short decades, went from these little sleepy, fishing villages into this world-class economic powerhouse. And if you've ever been to Hong Kong, the moment you land there, you can just feel the economic energy and the amount of activity that's happening there in the economy. It's just an amazing feeling to go to Hong Kong. And as you can see from the picture on the left here, though, it wasn't always that way. It used to just be kind of a sleepy little town there, and not anymore. But we can see also Havana, Cuba, in the exact same time frame, with a whole lot less economic freedom than Hong Kong, barely made any progress at all, right? It's really amazing the difference, amazing in a bad way, the difference in the amount of progress that Cuba managed to make versus Hong Kong in that same time period there. So and that's why, like I said, you have people literally risking their lives to escape Cuba, whereas you never have people risking their lives to escape Hong Kong. If anything, people risk their lives to try and get to Hong Kong. So that brings us to, well, why is this economic freedom so important, right? Well, because economic freedom, it leads to higher per capita income, higher life expectancy, higher literacy rates, better income for the poorest 10% in society, improved environmental protection with fewer wars and violent conflicts, and higher self-reported happiness of citizens with less corruption and bribery. All fantastic things. Like, how could you not be excited and in favor of having those things take place? But here we actually have some hard data for you. So we can see the dark green here are countries with the most economic freedom. All the way down to red are the countries with the least economic freedom. So the top 20%, next 20%, next 20, 20, 20, all the way down there. And so you can see in countries with the most economic freedom, the poorest 10% in those societies have way more income than the poorest people in the poor people in the least economically free countries. And so it's not just by a little bit, it's by like several times there. And just ask yourself, would you rather be a poor person in a rich country or a poor person in a poor country, right? Would you rather be a poor person in Hong Kong or a poor person in Venezuela? It's not a tough decision there. And so it's very, very clear. Countries with more economic freedom have a higher income level for the poorest 10% in society. And again, we can see the overall income per capita in countries with more economic freedom. They have significantly, not just a little bit, but significantly higher income per capita in those societies than every other amount of economic freedom there in the world. So, and again, adult literacy rates, right? You can see more people know how to read in countries with more economic freedom than in countries with less economic freedom. And is that cause or effect? I don't know, but it's a good thing either way. So you can see very, very clearly a clear correlation there between the amount of people that know how to read and the amount of economic freedom in a country. And again, we can see the average life expectancy in countries with more economic freedom. People live longer than in countries with less economic freedom. And it's not just a little bit, it's nearly 2 decades longer, right? So I'm 41 years old today. That's nearly half of my lifespan. People live on average, or I'm sorry, more than half, about half of how long I've lived already. That's how much longer people live in countries with more economic freedom on average than countries with the least amount of economic freedom. So if you don't want to die, more economic, and you don't want your friends and family and other people you care about around the world to die, more economic freedom has very, very strong correlation with that as well. So, and again, unemployment, right? You don't have to be, a genius to figure out that when you have more economic freedom, it's much, much easier for entrepreneurs to hire more employees. So more people will have jobs. So you can see very, very clear correlation here. The countries with the most economic freedom have the least amount of unemployment, and the countries with the least amount of economic freedom have the highest unemployment. Very, very clear correlation there again as well. And again, for anybody that's seen the miracle of a baby being born, if you want fewer babies to die at childbirth, in countries with more economic freedom, they have more resources that can be allocated to helping with that sort of thing. So far fewer children die at childbirth than in countries with the least amount of economic freedom. I'm sure just about anybody listening would rather, go through the childbirthing ordeal in a place like Hong Kong or Singapore than a place like Venezuela or Cuba. Or North Korea, right? It's not even a tough decision. So very, very clearly, more economic freedom leads to more children surviving being born, and not just the children, the mothers as well. So, and again, children in the labor force. If you're really, upset by when you see really young children in the labor force, well, countries with more economic freedom have more wealth. So they don't need kids to go to the labor force from such a young age. So you have far fewer children in the labor force from a young age in countries with more economic freedom than in countries with less economic freedom. So all really, really interesting correlations there. But it's important to point out that correlation doesn't prove causation. But when we see example after example all over the world in both theory and in practice of greater economic freedom leading to better results for rich and poor alike, old and young alike, everybody, black, white, yellow, red, any color around the world, anybody, we can make some really, really strong inferences. And if you're participating in this conference, you've probably already drawn those inferences, and that's why you're here. And that's why I'm here as well. So this is a slide that was originally based off of a blog post by Brian Armstrong, the founder of Coinbase.com, one of the biggest websites to bring digital currency adoption to people around the world. And Brian said that digital currency may be the most effective way the world has ever seen to increase economic freedom. If this happens, the implications are profound. It could lift many countries out of poverty, improve the lives of billions of people, and accelerate the pace of innovation in the world. And I think Brian's right about all those things, and all those things are really fantastic goals. And those are the things that motivated Brian to get involved in digital currencies and motivated myself to get involved in digital currencies. But we can see the exact same argument applies to startup societies, right? It's the exact same argument here, how startup societies will change the world. Well, startup societies may also be one of the most effective ways the world has ever seen to increase economic freedom. If this happens, the implications once again are profound. It could lift many countries out of poverty, improve the lives of billions of people, and accelerate the pace of innovation in the world. So the exact same arguments and motivations and reasonings for getting involved in digital currencies should motivate you to get involved in startup societies and special economic zones around the world, because it can have the exact same effects for people around the world. So that leads us to, the startup society's impact on economic freedom. The exact same thing as that I had from my second slide there with digital currencies. Startup societies can make it easier to start a business. They can enforce property rights. They can promote free trade. They can enable freedom of contract, and they can enable people, hopefully, to opt out of corrupt systems. So all those exact same arguments that motivate people to be excited about digital currencies should motivate people to be excited about, startup societies and special economic zones. And so Brian, he was talking about digital currencies here, but I think the same argument can apply in large part to these special economic zones, right? It will serve as a giant economic stimulus package for the world, accelerate innovation, reduce wars, make the poorest 10% better off, overthrow corrupt governments, and raise happiness. And I think that applies just about as much to digital currencies as it does to special economic zones. And with maybe the only exception there being about overthrowing corrupt governments, I think digital currencies may be able to do that more directly than special economic zones, but special economic zones can set worldwide examples for the rest of the world to look to and say, hey, look how much better that special economic zone did than this traditional zone where the government was still busy, controlling everything. And so can set an example to where through, name and shame, corrupt governments no longer have the perceived legitimacy for the policies that they're enacting, that clearly with empirical evidence from, East Germany versus West Germany, or North Korea versus South Korea, or whatever special other economic zones managed to be created around the world, it's clear which one leads to better results. And so that's why I say Bitcoin Cash and digital currencies combined with special economic zones are the best tools the world has ever seen to accomplish these goals. And so that brings us to another special project of mine that I took some of the money that I earned from my involvement in digital currencies with another early cryptocurrency adopter, Olivier Janssens. And we've gotten together and we formed freesociety.com. And the idea is to purchase sovereignty from an existing government to create the world's first society, where there actually will be a completely voluntary society. We've already reached out to a number of governments. The main thing that they asked us for at this point will give us exactly what the Constitution is going to be. So we've been working with a number of university thinkers to actually put together the initial Constitution for this. Olivier is the main point man. I may be the main spokesperson for this, but lots and lots of stuff is happening slowly, but it's still happening there. And I'm really, really excited to give this a try. And if you're a free market, individualist, loving libertarian, you obviously will love this project. But if you're, a state worshiping, love the government controlling and meddling and everything type of person as well, you should still love freesociety.org, because if we all set this up and then it fails miserably and it turns into the bad form of anarchy that the public imagines, with people throwing bombs and chaos, then you can point to that and say, hey, that's why you need to have governments doing all sorts of things. And so whether you're a statist or you're an anarchist, you should love the freesociety.com project. You can check that out at freesociety.com. And so that brings me to, if you're excited about all this, tell your friends, right? None of us can do this all by ourselves. And as we heard earlier on there, the biggest skyscraper in the world started with one guy having an idea, and it went from there. And so you can tell your friends about startupsocieties.org. You can get them started with Bitcoin Cash. You can get them started with all these things. Bitcoin.com is a fantastic resource for that. So if you're excited about improving the world and making the world a better place for everybody, those are two fantastic sources for you to help get started: Bitcoin.com and startupsocieties.com, or I'm sorry, .org. And so I just want to give special thanks to the sponsors of today's conference, though, as well. So there's the New Hans Network, which I probably didn't pronounce very well, but two that are extra near and dear to me are Protomos Capital. So this is basically a fund to try and fund some of these startup societies there that I'm an investor in myself. It's led by the semi-legendary Patri Friedman, the grandson of the legendary Milton Friedman and son of David Friedman. So I'm sure lots of people here are already familiar with him, and all around super, super interesting guy. Really, it was an honor to get to meet him in Tokyo a year or so ago. And so I'm excited to see what he's going to do with Protomos Capital. But another one that I want to give special thanks to is the Foundation for Economic Education. So somehow I was lucky enough as a very young man to get a subscription to their Freeman physical newsletter. This was before the internet. And I've been reading their articles, and I've been reading their website since, and all sorts of books that they had for sale. And the Foundation for Economic Education is a just absolutely fantastic organization for anybody out there. And they were so fantastic that actually in 2013, right, so 7 years ago now, I donated more than $1 million worth of Bitcoin to the Foundation of Economic Education, because they're busy promoting the ideas that are very, important to me and are busy, making the world a better place as those ideas around the world are implemented. So special thanks to both of those. So I look forward to seeing what all these guys do in the future. So if you haven't checked them out yet, please do. And it's in large part thanks to those guys today. Today's conference is possible. So anyhow, that was me. I'm Roger Ver. I was the first person to start investing in this ecosystem. And I implore all of you to get involved, because digital currencies and startup societies go hand in hand. They're one and the same almost. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Roger. That was very interesting. It was more energizing than my morning coffee. Thank you so much. We have time for making some questions, so please feel free to ask anything you want to know about Roger's talk. We have a few minutes left. That was very interesting, Roger. What a interesting correlation you found between lifespan and economic freedom. It makes sense, no? It makes all sense.
Lots of things make sense once you hear about them, but before you hear about it, it hadn't occurred to you. And so there's been lots of times in my life where somebody said something to me and I thought, oh, that makes so much sense. Why did that not occur to me previously? And so I think we just need to keep pointing it out, even if it seems obvious to you. Maybe lots of the people in the world haven't realized, oh, people in South Korea live longer than people in North Korea. Like, once you hear it, it's clear. But what's the difference between North Korea and South Korea? Well, in North Korea, the government tries to control absolutely everything. In South Korea, they have a relatively free economy. So there's definitely some causation there as well, not just correlations. So
that is very true. And in relation to Bitcoin, for example, what thing is obvious today for you that it wasn't 15 years ago?
One thing that's obvious to me that wasn't 15 years ago. Well, 15 years ago, so I guess I want to give another, special accolade to David Friedman for writing a book called Future Imperfect. I think he wrote that in like 1998 or 99 or so, a long, long time ago. And in that book, and the internet was just getting started in the late 90s, right? And in that book, he was writing about what the world was going to be like when people have anonymous, I think he called it cyber cash in the book, and basically described how people would use digital signatures to do commerce with people on the internet without linking it to their real world identity. And the example he used the most in the book was how lawyers would be able to practice law without necessarily having a law license. And so you'd have black market lawyers, but you could prove that you're dealing with the same person over and over and have online reputation systems, and all the payments would be done with this anonymous cyber cash. And then, more than a decade later, when Bitcoin finally came along, I read about Bitcoin and I thought, oh my gosh, the cyber cash that David Friedman had been talking about in his book was finally here. And so that's an example of how some people are able to see the future so much more clearly than others. And that's why I think it's so important to seek out these people that have really good track records, whether they're alive or dead, but pick up their books and read their books, because it's like having a one-on-one tutoring session with some of the greatest minds to have ever lived. And what more could you want out of life than have a one-on-one tutoring session with some of the smartest people to have ever lived? So go and read more books. Reading books is one of the best ways you can possibly spend your time. And pick up books by David Friedman, by Milton Friedman, by Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, Adam Smith. Pick up any of these guys' books, and they will just help you see the world much more clearly. And I guess that's what I attribute to me being able to see the importance of Bitcoin earlier than most, was from reading books from great minds like von Mises and David Friedman and others. It's just made it so clear when Bitcoin came along, oh, this is what the world's been waiting for. This is one of the most important inventions in the history of humankind. And I think I'm ahead of the curve on Bitcoin Cash today versus Bitcoin. So for those that, I don't want to bore too many people with the inside politics of Bitcoin, but long story short, the thing that everybody's calling Bitcoin today no longer has the economic characteristics that made it popular to begin with. It has the brand and the network effect, but it doesn't have the actual useful characteristics that made people start using it to begin with. Bitcoin Cash and a bunch of other digital currencies do. So I'm not so optimistic on the future of what everybody's calling Bitcoin today. And I think history will show me to be on the front side of that curve as well. So.
Okay. We have a question by Robert King. How difficult it is promoting anarcho-capitalist societies to existing governments?
Yeah, it was kind of hard. So when we first started approaching some of them, saying, "Hey, we want you to sell us some land, and then cede your sovereignty to that land, and let us try our free society project," they on one hand, they were surprisingly open to the idea. It wasn't just, no, get out of here, leave us alone, which seemed like it could be a real possibility that would be the response. Their actual response was, well, we want to see exactly what the laws and the rules and the regulations are going to be. And so we've been busy putting together, and I have, the first draft, or maybe it's the third or fourth draft by now, version of this Constitution to try and make a totally voluntary society. And once we have that polished to the point where we're comfortable with it, we'll circle back to these governments and say, okay, here's going to be the law of the land here, and we'll see what their reaction is. But I think now may be an even better time for this, though, too, with the crazy coronavirus destruction of the world. And I want to point out, it's not the coronavirus that's destroying the world's economy. It's the government's reactions around the world that's destroying the world's economy. And so if anything, now is an even better time where government's going to be even more desperate to have some money, especially, cold hard assets like, gold or cryptocurrencies can really go a long ways, I think, when the entire world's economy is, to me, seems like it's headed to a lockdown. And the stock market's going up, but that's only because they're printing a bunch of money. Everybody's, at home, not working for the most part. And I think that at the end of the day, if printing money could make everybody wealthy, why did anybody ever need to work to begin with anyhow? They could have just printed money and sent it to everybody, and that would be the end of it. So the reality of the matter is people need to go into the factories and go into the farms and actually do the work and produce the things that people need in their lives. And if they're not in those factories and farms and doing those sorts of actual productive work, you're not going to have the computers and the cars and the homes and the food that people need. So printing money doesn't do anything. It's the actual production in the economy that's so important.
It's the actual work. It is true. We have a question from Mo Malibu. How difficult it is to come up with a valuation for sovereignty?
Yeah, so I think how difficult is it to come up with a valuation for sovereignty? So the question is, are you talking about it for yourself? Are you talking about it for a particular piece of land mass? Like what is it in regards to? And if you look at it for yourself, the answer is going to be different for every single person, right? Different people want different things out of lives. Like some people may want to just hang out in the jungle and smoke ayahuasca every day, and like they'll be super happy and content doing that for the rest of their life. Other people aren't so interested in that. So sovereignty means different things to different people. I'm a really big fan of John Locke. And like, if you haven't read any John Locke, read John Locke. And he talks about how each individual owns themselves and they own their own body and they own the labor that comes from their body. So if you then find something out there in the state of nature that nobody's, messed with at all and is, currently unowned, when you mix your labor with that thing that was previously unowned, it now becomes part of you or your property because you've mixed your labor with something that was previously unowned. And so once you have that thing that you now own, you can then trade it with anybody else around the world that has, property that they own because they've mixed their labor with it, or they've traded it something else they previously mixed their labor with for it. And I think as long as you have any sort of voluntary transaction with anybody out there, that makes everybody better off, because anytime anybody voluntarily does anything with anybody else, both people are better off after the exchange. Otherwise, the exchange wouldn't happen. And so I think that that's the overall goal. But different people value different things, right? So some people want to buy a new iPhone every year. Other people might want to go on a vacation instead, right? So different people will spend their money on different things because some people value a new iPhone, other people value the vacation more, or other people will value something else. And so that's the important part. If we want to increase the amount of personal happiness around the world and individual sovereignty, people need to be free to do whatever they want with their own time and their own money, so long as they're not violently interjecting themselves into the business of others. And so that's the society that I want to live in, and that's the society that I want to build, and that's the society I suspect lots of people in this conference are also interested in building.
Along those same lines, we have a question by Kat Serlet. What would be your ideal country to purchase sovereignty?
We don't know yet. I think the answer to that will be whichever one is agreeable to our proposition and our ideas. So any is better than none. But ideally, it would be near some major trading partners, right? Because trade is that's how everything gets done, right? You produce something and then trade it with others. And thanks to this miracle of the specialization of labor and the division of labor, the entire world is able to become much more prosperous than if everybody was, living by themselves on their own, desert island. So, the short answer is anywhere that'll let us is the ideal place, but ideally close to some major trading partners.
Okay, and I think our last question by Alex Paul Vela. Are there any countries with constitutions that have provisions to allow portions of their territory to be converted into a private zone?
Yeah, there's actually already been plenty of historical examples of this exact thing happening. So Monaco is exactly that, right? Some guy went and paid the king, and Monaco was formed. So it's not like this is something that's never happened before. There's actually a historical precedence for this, and there's a number of countries around the world that should be open to it. So.
Okay, Roger, thank you very much. Do you have time for one last question?
Sure.
Sure, okay, cool. Let's see which was the last question that was asked here. John Locke's, this question is by JW. John Locke's arguments only work with the assumption of a God. Do you share that assumption?
So I was actually about to type in the chat a reply to JW's question because it caught my attention as well. No, I don't agree with that assumption. And it's been probably 24 years since I read John Locke. So I don't remember. Obviously, John Locke was some sort of a theist, but as were most people in his day. But no, I don't think it requires a God. I think you can use logic and reason and evidence to show I own my own body, I own my own thoughts, I own my own actions. And even if somebody points a gun at me, they still don't magically take control of my mind. I'm still the one that decides with my mind and my body whether or not to obey the person that's pointing a gun at me. And so therefore, like my ownership over my own labor, my own body, that's the end state. Like there's nothing that can change that. It's the state of nature. Whether there's a God or not a God doesn't change the fact that I own my own body and my own motions and my own mind. So if John Locke thought that, I don't agree with him on that front. But again, it's been 20-something years since I read his works directly. And I want to tell people, like, read the primary text too. Like, don't just go and read other people talking about the primary text. If you want to understand something, read the primary text. Like I saw some crazy Bitcoin maximalist calling me a crypto Keynesian. And I asked him, have you ever read John Maynard Keynes? Right? And he was saying that he was a crypto, Austrian. I said, well, have you ever read Ludwig von Mises? He hadn't read any of the primary texts. So it's just stunning to me how people love to pontificate on all sorts of things without ever having read the primary texts. Please go out there and read the primary text, and that's the best way to have an understanding of whatever the subject is that you're busy talking about. So primary texts are great, and it's like having a one-on-one tutoring session with some of the greatest minds all throughout history. And an excellent question, JW. Later on today, I'll do some Googling and review what John Locke thought in regards to that, because that would be interesting for me as well. Thanks for the challenging question.
No, Roger, thanks to you. It was a pleasure to have you here. Like I said, this was more energizing than my morning coffee. I'm going to politely let you out of the system. I hope you have a great day. I hope you're safe, your family too.
And I'll be watching online, though, for the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.